Okay, welcome everyone. We've been doing a series on the Noble Eightfold Path, and tonight is the final component in the series. But because we have quite a few new people here tonight, I'll do a recap. A very brief recap. So the major teaching of the Buddha is that there's suffering in this world, and he's teaching us how to come to an end of the suffering. And we're talking about mental, emotional suffering. As long as we have a physical body, then we're going to be subject to accidents, illnesses, aches and pains, death. But at least our training can help us not to add the second arrow, not to weep and wail about it and make it worse with our stressing about it. You know, you do what you can to heal yourself or ease pains, but part of our practice is accepting reality. Anyway, so the major teaching of the Buddha, or the teaching of the Buddha, is how to come to the end of this mental, emotional suffering. And also, when you have full awakening, then it's an end to being reborn into the round of rebirth, into samsara. And the way to do this, he calls it the Noble Eightfold Path. There are these 8 components that we've been talking about over the past 8 weeks. So for those of you who are new, if you go to our website and under the menu item resources, there's a drop-down menu that gives you can click on videos of past talks. So if you're interested, you can go back and look at the other talks that we gave on this topic. So a good thing to do, because it's very, very basic to our practice. So what the steps have been doing so far is just gradually stilling our mind. And the first way we get some stillness of our mind is by living a moral life, like not harming self and others. Because if you say something hurtful to somebody else, or, harm them in some way, then when you try and sit down and meditate, you're full of remorse and you can't still the mind because your mind's, agitating about this hurtful thing that you did. So the first degree of stillness we get is by living a non-harming life, a moral life. And also doing, besides just not doing harm, we also do the opposite, which is being kind, being compassionate, being generous. So putting in the opposite. So that's our first level. Then when we sit down to meditate, we sort of do the second level, because as we sit down to meditate, then we try and be with our meditation object, but then we get pulled off with what are called the hindrances. Wanting something you don't have, or not wanting something that's in your face, or that's happening in your life, or feeling drowsy, or feeling restless or agitated, or doubting the teachings of the Buddha. Like, is this going to really work? Is this the right thing to do? Can I do it? So all these hindrances come and assail the mind, and so we've talked about various ways, various antidotes, or various ways to let go of these hindrances. And when we're able to do that, then we have another degree of stilling and calming of the mind. And the culmination of the stilling and calming of the mind is called this right stillness, the chant that we spoke at the beginning. Other words for right stillness are Samadhi, or Jhana, the Jhana states. And we'll be talking about those tonight. Okay, so I'm just going to go over our meditation practice in brief. So when we sit down to meditate, we bring our mind to our meditation object, which for many of us is the breath. For some of you, it might be metta, loving friendliness, or it might be another 38 topics. The Buddha gave us 40 topics, but certainly the two commonest ones are the breath and metta. And so you bring your mind, you're bringing your mind, or you're actually letting the breath. I'll just talk about the breath because that's my meditation object, so it's the easiest for me to talk about. You're letting the breath fill your awareness. So what we're trying to do is unify the mind. To bring the mind to stillness, it can't be thinking of that or seeing this or hearing that or feeling this. It needs to be unified on just one thing. But it's not like a pinpoint, like tightening down, a tight, narrow focus. It's more letting the breath totally fill you. So it's a very expansive, beautiful feeling. It's not a tight, small feeling. It's an expansive feeling. So you're putting your main attention on where you're feeling the breath entering your body. And then you're not following the breath like down into your lungs or all over your body, because again, that's movement, that's not unification. So your attention is mostly just where you're experiencing the breath coming in. But we have peripheral awareness. Like if I look straight ahead, then I'm looking straight at you, but my peripheral awareness is seeing practically everybody else in the room. So even though my attention is here where the breath is coming in, my peripheral awareness has this feeling of my whole body being full of the breath. I remember sometimes, I would sometimes get a little bit of a headache, a tension headache when I was meditating. And it was because I was sort of confining the breath. And so I would just sort of image that my skull had holes in it or it was open. So that when I breathed in, the breath was filling me and even going out into my aura. And then the headache would go away instantly. So it's really important not to sort of focus down, tighten down, constrict, confine, but just letting this very soft fullness. So that's our goal. And then, of course, the hindrances come along. And if they're mild, we just notice it's there and then bring yourself back to feeling the fullness of the breath. And if they're stronger, then in the past talks, we've gone over various antidotes to how to let those hindrances go so we can just be with the breath. And let yourself enjoy that. One way to feel enjoyment with the breath is if you remember how stressed you can be at times with your brain, stressing about various things. And then when you just feel the difference of when you're letting the stress go and you're just filling yourself with this beautiful breath coming in and out. The contrast is like, it's so peaceful and soothing compared to your brain stressing out. And so that can give you a lot of joy, just experiencing that peace of this unifying your mind just on this single object. And as we do this, then there's sort of a samadhi or the jhanas. There's four of them. There's 4 different levels, and then beyond that, there's what's called the immaterial states. But I'm not going to talk about those because I think most of us are just working on approaching the jhanas right now, so we won't worry about the deeper states. But for the first jhana, there's 5 characteristics that you're going to start feeling as your mind is settling, as your mind is becoming still, as your mind is getting filled just with the awareness of the breath. And so the first two you're doing as soon as you sit down to meditate. They're called Vitakka and Vichara. And Vitakka is bringing your awareness to your meditation object. So bringing your awareness to your breath. So the analogy is if you're practicing with a bow and arrow and you have a target, and when you're aiming the arrow and it's going towards the target, that's you bringing your awareness to your breath. And then when the arrow sticks in the target, then it's staying there. And so that's vichara. You bring you get pulled away with a thought, you let it go, you come back to your breath. So that coming back to your breath is the vitakka. And then the vichara is when you're there with your breath. You're there with your breath. You're there with your breath. And then, oops, something pulls you away. You let it go. Vitakka, bringing yourself back. And then you're there for a while. You're there for a while. So that's the first two qualities that will eventually bring us into the state of samadhi or jhanas, which is sort of the ultimate stillness. The next one is, the Pali word is piti, often translated as joy or rapture. Once you're in the jhana states, this is a a pure mind state. But before the jhanas, it can be experienced in the body. So the next, I'll just talk to you about piti and sukha together. So the next two states are piti, or components are piti and sukha. So piti is often described as joy and sukha as happiness. And the analogy for this is you're in the desert, you're hot, you're thirsty, you're exhausted, like you're struggling along, and then you see an oasis, like this little, some trees giving shade and a little pool of cool water. And then, so here you are trudging along, and you're tired, and you're hot, and you're thirsty, and you see that, and you go, wow! And so that sort of excited feeling is piti, like, oh, I'm gonna get cooled off soon. And then you make it to the oasis, and you dive in the water, and you swim around, you get nice and cool, and you come up on the bank and sit under the shady tree, and it's like, ah. So that's sukha. So piti is sort of like this excitement. Oh boy, the shade is coming up, the coolness, the water to drink is coming up. So that's piti, sort of kind of an excited feeling. And this is before jhana. And then the sukha is, you've had plenty to drink, you're cooled off, you're in the shade, you're feeling so good. I remember I heard this, I think I got the analogy from Thich Nhat Hanh when I was on a retreat with him. And at the break time, there was like 1,500 people at this retreat. And so at break time, the bathrooms, you had these huge long lineouts, people, and so we were joking when it was like getting our turn, where it was like we were next to get into the toilet. That was piti, like, oh good. And then when you came out of the toilet, like, and your bladder was empty, it was like, that was sukha. So that's the next two components. And the final component is called ekaggata. And this is the unification of the mind. Like, you're not paying attention to sights, to sounds, to smells, to tastes, to thinking. You're just fully there, being just filled with the awareness of the breath, or whatever your meditation object is. So that's ekaggata. So as you're stilling your mind, as you're being, using the vitakka vichara to be with your breath, because you're not paying attention to sight, then that, the neural activity for seeing shuts off. Because you're not paying attention to hearing, that temporarily shuts off. Same thing with smelling, tasting, feeling where your body is, sitting. That all gets sort of shut off because it's not being stimulated. There's nothing happening in those areas. Same thing with thinking. And so then you're just left with pure awareness. just pure awareness. So when these 5 factors, Vitaka, Vichara, Piti, Sukha, and Ekaggata, when they're balanced and strong enough, the hindrances are gone, and then these various other, or other sensory experiences are sort of shutting down, then at some moment you switch from knowing that you're sitting here in a room with other people meditating, and then you're all of a sudden, it's like you go through a door, and then you come to what's called jhana, which is the first level of samadhi. And it's a very, very blissful state, very beautiful state. It just makes any joy or happiness you've gotten from any sensory experience in the world just pale in comparison. It's very, very beautiful. So this is the first benefit of the jhanas, is the Buddha called it a pleasant abiding in the here and now. So part of our practice is trying to simplify our life, trying to pull back from the going after experiences in the sensory world because of their ultimate unsatisfactoriness, because they're temporary. They give us some joy for a while, and then it ends. And it's way easier to do that if you've had this experience of entering the states of jhana, because they're such a beautiful experience. And then you have an alternative. You have something that's generated from within, so it's not dependent on other people, it's not dependent on the weather, it's not dependent on how much money you have, it's not dependent on conditions out there. It's something that you learn to generate from within. So it's very beautiful. But that's not the main reason for it. The main reason is to bring us into a full awakening, into liberation from suffering. And how does it do that? The way it does it is when our minds are still. Now, when we're in jhana states, we're not thinking, so nothing's going to happen there other than having a pleasant experience. But when you emerge from the jhana states, you bring that stillness with you for a while until life intervenes and disturbs it. But for a while after coming out of the jhana states, your mind is so still that it can see reality really clearly. And then this is where we come to it brings us to the next step, which is what's called insights, or seeing reality clearly. We see the Four Noble Truths that the Buddha talked about. We see cause and conditions. We see how everything is due to causes and conditions. We see the 3 characteristics of everything. That everything's impermanent, that everything's inherently unsatisfactory. Unsatisfactory because either it's annoying or disturbing to start with, or it's something beautiful, but it comes to an end. So it's unsatisfactory in that way, that it can't give us lasting happiness. It can't give us lasting joy because it ends. And then the third aspect is anatta, not self, which just means that we realize there's nothing solid about anything, including ourselves. We're just a verb due to causes and conditions, and as causes and conditions change, then how we feel changes, what we're thinking changes. It's just, there's nothing solid in here. Everything's sort of flowing like a river. So this is the main reason that we want to develop. We've got this beautiful side effect of pleasant abiding in the here and now. But the main reason we're practicing this is because it brings us this clarity that allows us to have the insights that result in awakening. Now, an analogy for this is the Noble Eightfold Path is a path. And if you imagine awakening, like liberation from suffering, is a mountain, but there's a mist and you can't see that mountain. You're on the path because you read something, or you heard somebody talk about meditation and it sounded good to you. And so you decided to step on the path and start walking towards this mountain you can't see. Um, and you've had some good experiences along the way, like you've learned how to be more peaceful, less agitated. And so that's feeling good. And then there's people coming the other way from the mountain saying, I've been to the mountain. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. And so you're encouraged by that. But then as you're going along, like the mist parts for a moment, you see the mountain, and then the mist comes back in. Now you're no longer walking on that path because other people have said it's a good thing. It's that mountain is there because you've had a glimpse of it. And that glimpse of the mountain is called the first level of awakening. Our awakening doesn't happen in just one, it happens in 4 stages. And that first stage is getting that glimpse. So there's no more doubt about, about the teachings, about the path, so it's very encouraging. Now, it's a couple of things I want to talk about. It's nice to know about these 5 factors, Vitakka, Vichara, Piti, Sukha, and Ekaggata, because as you're sitting there with your breath, when you notice some of these coming up, it's sort of like a road sign. Like if you're driving from here to Calgary, it's sort of like, Calgary's in 75 kilometers, or it's in 50, or it's in 25. So having these factors arising is saying, oh, I'm progressing. So it's an encouragement to you. And then it's also important, I won't go into this now, but as we go through the different levels of the jhana states, we use our knowledge of those to help us to move through the different levels. But we'll just talk about the first level right now. Now, just a minute. There was something else I wanted to tell you about this. Yeah. So, but an important thing is our goal is the mountain. Our goal is awakening, also known as enlightenment, nibbana, nirvana. That's our goal. But we can't get there by focusing on the goal. Like we know what the goal is, but we can't focus on it because that will probably, bring up the hindrance of desire. Like I want to get to the goal. I want to get to the goal. I want to get to the goal. And it's a hindrance, desire is a hindrance, and a hindrance isn't going to allow us to get to the goal. So yes, that's our goal. That's why we're on this path. But what we need to focus on is the causes and conditions. It's like if you want to get a new car, that's your goal, but you're just going to make yourself miserable thinking, I want that car. I want that car. Why don't I have that car? I'm so miserable. I don't have a car. You'll just get yourself just totally in a state. But instead, it's like, okay, I want that car. Well, what are the causes and conditions? I've got to save money. And so every month you put aside so much money, or maybe you take on some extra jobs to save some more money. But you're focusing on what are the causes and conditions, putting aside that money each month until then you can purchase that car. It doesn't help just wishing. Yeah, so the same thing. We don't want to be hindering ourselves by desiring the goal. Oh, thank you. Water. Biggie voice. We want to come back and just focus on the causes and the conditions. And what are they? Morality. Sitting down, being with our meditation object, letting go of the hindrances, delighting in our breath, just the soothing quality, or the whatever of the breath. Something else just came to mind and slipped away. So being with your meditation object, if when you leave, like when you finish meditating, if you can keep your meditation object in the background, so then as you go about your day, if you can just be aware of your breath there as you're doing sort of routine things. I mean, if you're having to really focus, then it'll be gone and you're focusing on whatever you're doing. But if it's fairly routine stuff and you can just have the awareness of the breath there while you're doing other things, then this makes it easier the next time you sit down to meditate to get right in there. Because to get your mind to the point of stillness where you can enter the jhanas, most likely you're going to need to go on a meditation retreat, because it really does take a lot of stilling of the mind. It's not a quick and easy thing to do. Like there's, and unfortunately, our monastery here is too small. We don't have the capacity to, offer long retreats. But Birkenforest Monastery is not too far away. And once Aya is back, she knows of many other places where you can go to do longer retreats. So that's something to consider if you're able to, to take some time off and go for a longer retreat. Then you can really develop this quality of stillness, of samadhi. But it can be helpful if you can keep your meditation object sort of in the background. And I had a good experience of this yesterday on Monday. Pali and I were on supposed to be on a 4-day meditation retreat in-house here. We had a whole bunch of things that kind of prevented most of it from happening. But I did have more meditation time than usual. And then I had to go into a funeral on Monday into Calgary. And I was able, once I was on the highway, I was able to be with every breath for the whole highway part, because I'd had a few days of stillness here, more meditation practice, being with my breath. I was able to be with it. But then I attended the funeral, so there was the whole ceremony, all this eulogies, the slideshow, the visiting with all my cousins. So coming back, I tried to be with my breath, and it just no way. Like my brain just kept going back, reviewing the funeral and the talking to people and everything that had happened. So it really shows how if you have, several days to just be in stillness, calm your mind, then you can carry it on. But then as soon as life gets busy, then it disrupts it. Okay, now I want to tell you a few more things about signposts. So these 5 characteristics of the first jhana are some of the signposts of going into the first jhana. The other one it's called a nimitta, or a sign. For most people, this is a light. I've been told that there's other signs, but I haven't heard anybody talking about them, so I don't know what they are. But when you become, when the hindrances are gone, your other senses are shutting down, you're just filled with the awareness of the breath, and you're having more vichara than vitaka, you're staying there with it rather than going back and forth. Some joy is arising, and this may not be the kind of joy that's like roller coaster joy. It may be a more subtle joy. So, if you're used to just having roller coaster joy in your life, you're going to have, might take some time to get used to the more subtle joy. But piti before jhana can be experienced in the body as sort of tingling, or sort of like rushes of energy, or a feeling of expanding, expanding up the ceiling, or floating. It can be all kinds of sort of different physical sensations. In jhana, it's a mental thing, and it's bliss. But as you're settling, as things are stilling, as this joy is coming up, then you might experience light. Before light, there can be more complex images. I used to see, like, this is called a Buddha Rupa. Rupa means like a statue. So it's a statue of the Buddha. I'd be meditating and then pop, I just have this vision of a Buddha Rupa. Once I had a lime green mandala, just sort of popped. I've heard of other people seeing scenery. You're with your breath, and then you might see a field with trees or something. So that signpost, Calgary's still quite a ways away because that's complex, like it's not unification. When you're just getting a light, then that's more unified than a complex, like a Buddha Rupa or a mandala or a scenery thing. So lights. And then usually at first the lights are moving. Have you ever seen those lava lamps? Dates me, but used to have those lava lamps anyway. So that's what it looks like to me, is these lights that are sort of moving, changing all the time. So again, that's not unification because there's movement there, but it is a sort of a road sign that things are getting more still. And then eventually that light will become still and then become brighter and brighter. Now, that light is there because you're aware of your breath. Your awareness is just fully unified on the breath. If you start looking, like if you get a scenery or, you have these visions or you get these lava lamp lights or something, if you start focusing on them, then they're going to disappear because the cause for them was your unification on the breath. And so if you leave the breath, then you've left the cause. You've gone to this interesting thing happening, but then it disappears because you've gone away from its cause. So you need to, even though all this is happening, your peripheral awareness is aware of it, but your main focus here is just this fullness of this breath coming in and out. And it's only when it gets to be like a searchlight or something, like a really bright light, that then you can finally switch over to that. But I think at that stage, it'd be best for you to I have interviews with our teacher. Ahimsa and myself, we're studying with this former nun called Beth Upton. And she's on retreat right now for the month of December. But starting in January, she has these group interviews. And she likes you to have, she's going to be changing her interview schedule. So we'll find out what it is in January. But at this point, she always wanted you to have an individual interview with her first. And then you could come to these group interviews and ask questions. If you haven't had an individual interview, you can come to the group sittings, but you can't ask questions. But you learn a lot listening to everybody else's questions and answers. But I think because she's becoming so busy, she's going to assign some senior students to do this initial interview. I'm suspecting that. But anyway, if you get to the point where you're having lights and stuff in your meditation practice, I'd really encourage you to connect with Beth. Her website's just Beth Upton, BETHUPTON, and I think it's .com, something like that. Anyway, if that doesn't work, ask me and I'll look it up, what it is. But anyway, that's another road sign when you're getting the lights. It's another road sign that you're getting close to coming into this super still state that we call Samadhi, or the Jhanas states. Okay, let me just see if there's something I left out that I want to talk about. Oh yeah, so there's one other thing that can happen. So that we can use the jhanas for three things. So first is the pleasant abiding in the here and now. And that's important, like if we're sort of letting go of, the joys from sensory hits, then having this internally generated joy, it's very nourishing. it's a beautiful thing to have, and it's very nourishing for you. So that's the first thing. The second thing, as I said, is the clarity that comes with it once you exit from the jhanas allows you to have the insights that lead you to awakening to the end of suffering. The third thing is some people, not everyone, it's just if you have the propensity, some people develop psychic powers. So one of the psychic powers is remembering your past lives. And this is very helpful. This is very helpful to awakening because if you can remember hundreds of past lives, then you're going to get a feeling of been there, done that. It won't be such a wish to, for rebirth to keep going in the round of samsara. Because you've seen, I've done this a few thousand or million times. Another one is apparently reading people's minds. Now, if you're a teacher, that's very handy because if you're with a student, that's struggling, and then you might get some insight into what's happening and be able to more effectively guide them. But there's a real danger and there's other psychic powers. I don't know, walking through walls, floating in the air, levitating, various things. But you have to be careful with this because if this should happen, you don't want to get caught into conceit or, like, wow, look at me, I can do this. Because then that's just going to grind your progress to a halt. Anyway, so just throw that in. Okay, so I think that just let me end the recording here.